Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Aurora Dawn and watched the stars through the wide viewport. He had been a ship commander for 12 years now and had seen many strange things in deep space. But nothing had prepared him for what they were about to discover. Megan Phillips sat at the pilot controls with her hands moving across the display screens. She was the best pilot Jake had ever worked with, and she never complained about the long missions far from Earth. Next to her was Linda Hayes, who handled all communications for the ship. She wore her headset and monitored dozens of channels at once. Dr. Alan Carter stood near the science station and studied the readings that scrolled across his monitors. He was older than the rest of the crew and had more experience with unusual phenomena. Jake trusted his judgment completely. The Aurora Dawn had been surveying the Kepler sector for 3 months. They were supposed to map new systems and look for planets that humans could colonize someday. It was routine work and usually boring, but today was different. Linda suddenly sat up straight in her chair. She pressed one hand against her headset and listened carefully. Her face showed confusion and then concern. She looked over at Jake with wide eyes. "Something is out there, Commander. I am picking up a signal, but it does not match anything in our database. It is not from any human ship or colony. It is not from any known alien species either." Jake walked over to her station and looked at the data on her screen. The signal came in waves, and each wave contained complex mathematical patterns. It repeated every 30 seconds with perfect precision. "Can you trace the source?" Linda worked her controls for a moment. "The signal is coming from coordinates about 2 million kilometers from our current position. There should not be anything out there. No planets and no stars. Just empty space." Jake considered their options. Protocol said they should report unusual findings to Earth Command and wait for instructions, but that would take weeks because of the distance. By then, whatever was sending the signal might be gone. "Set a course for those coordinates." "We are going to investigate." Megan nodded and her fingers danced across the controls. The Aurora Dawn turned smoothly and began moving toward the source of the signal. The ship accelerated and the stars seemed to shift around them. They traveled for 6 hours before they saw it. At first it looked like a small asteroid tumbling slowly through space. But as they got closer, they realized it was something else entirely. It was a structure, artificial and ancient. The object was roughly spherical and about 500 meters across. Its surface was covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. Parts of it looked like metal, but other parts were made of materials they could not identify. It gave off a faint blue glow. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This was not human technology. It was not like anything humans had ever built. And it was clearly very old. Alan scanned the structure with every sensor the Aurora Dawn had. His face grew more excited as the data came in. "Commander, this thing is ancient. I mean, really ancient. My estimates suggest it has been here for millions of years, maybe longer, and it is still functioning somehow. Can we dock with it? There appears to be an opening on the southern side. It might be an airlock or entry port." Jake made his decision quickly. "We are going in. Megan, bring us alongside that opening. Linda, keep monitoring that signal. Alan, you are with me. We are going to board that thing." 30 minutes later, Jake and Alan floated through the airlock and into the ancient structure. Their suits had lights that cut through the darkness inside. The interior was vast and filled with corridors that branched in every direction. The walls were covered in symbols and diagrams that glowed softly. They moved carefully through the corridors and followed the signal to its source. It led them to a large chamber at the center of the structure. The chamber was circular and its walls were lined with thousands of crystalline panels. Each panel contained information stored in a format they could barely comprehend. Alan connected his portable computer to one of the panels and began downloading data. His hands shook slightly as he worked. "This is incredible, Jake. This is a library. A repository of knowledge left by whoever built this place. I am getting fragments of their language and history. They called themselves the Architects. What happened to them?" Alan continued working and his face grew pale as he translated more of the data. "They are extinct. They have been gone for millions of years. But they left this message for whoever would find it. It is a warning." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "A warning about what?" Alan turned to look at him and his eyes were filled with fear. "About something they called the Harvesters. According to this data, the Harvesters are an ancient intelligence that travels through the galaxy. They appear every 50,000 years and they destroy any civilization they find. The architects tried to fight them, but they lost. Every advanced species in this region of space has been eliminated by the harvesters. Thousands of civilizations just gone. Jake stared at the glowing panels around them. Why would they leave this warning? Because according to their calculations, humanity is next. The harvesters follow a pattern and Earth is in their path. Alan paused and looked at the data again. The timeline suggests they will arrive in 3 years, maybe less. Jake felt the weight of those words settle over him. They had come out here looking for new worlds to explore. Instead, they had found a message that could mean the end of everything. The end of Earth, the end of humanity. We need to get this data back to Earth immediately. Every piece of information about the harvesters could help us prepare. They worked for hours downloading everything they could from the architect repository. The data filled their computer systems completely. When they finally returned to the Aurora Dawn, Jake ordered Megan to set course for Earth at maximum speed. As they left the ancient structure behind, Jake stood on the bridge and watched it disappear into the darkness. The architects had left their warning hoping someone would find it in time. Now it was up to humanity to do what the architects could not. They had to find a way to survive the harvesters. The journey back to Earth took 2 months. During that time, Alan worked day and night to translate and analyze the architect data. What he learned was terrifying. The harvesters were not just powerful. They were nearly unstoppable. They had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than humanity. They had weapons that could crack planets and technology that seemed to violate the laws of physics. But Jake noticed something in the data that gave him a small amount of hope. The architects had been methodical and logical in their approach to fighting the harvesters. They had tried to match the harvesters' technology for technology and strategy for strategy. They had fought the way any rational civilization would fight. And they had lost. Maybe that was the key. Maybe humanity needed to fight differently. They needed to be unpredictable. Irrational, even. They needed to use every advantage they had, no matter how strange or unconventional. When the Aurora Dawn finally reached Earth orbit, Jake sent an emergency transmission to the United Earth Council. Within hours, he was summoned to appear before them in person. He stood in the Great Council chamber and presented everything they had found. He showed them the architect data and explained the threat that was coming. The council members listened in silence. When he finished speaking, the chamber erupted in chaos. Some demanded immediate military action. Others insisted the data must be a hoax. A few simply sat in shock, unable to process what they had heard. President Karen Mitchell called for order and the chamber slowly grew quiet. She looked at Jake with hard eyes. "Commander Morrison, do you believe this threat is real?" Jake met her gaze without hesitation. "Yes, ma'am, I do. The architects were real. Their warning is real. And if we do nothing, the harvesters will destroy us just like they destroyed everyone else." The president nodded slowly. "Then we have work to do. Humanity has faced extinction before, and we have always found a way to survive. We will find a way again." Jake left the council chamber that day knowing that everything had changed. The peaceful era of exploration was over. Humanity was about to enter a war unlike any they had ever fought. A war for their very survival against an enemy that had never been defeated. But he also knew that humans had something no other species seemed to have. They had hope. And sometimes hope was enough. The United Earth Council declared a state of emergency within hours of Jake Morrison's testimony. President Karen Mitchell appointed Admiral Stephen Blake as Supreme Commander of all human military forces. His job was to prepare Earth and its 12 colonies for the coming war. Stephen Blake was a career military officer who had served for 40 years. He had commanded fleets during the colony rebellions and the resource wars. He was known for being tough and practical. But even he felt overwhelmed by the task ahead of him. He assembled a team of the best minds humanity had to offer. Dr. Patricia Young was a xenobiologist who specialized in alien life forms. She had studied every known alien species and understood how different forms of intelligence worked. Marcus Webb was an engineer who had designed most of the defensive systems protecting Earth's colonies. General Peter Cross commanded the largest battle fleet in human space. They met in a secure facility deep underground on Earth. The architect data was projected on massive screens around the room. They studied it for days, trying to find any weakness in the harvesters. Patricia pointed at a section of data showing harvester attack patterns. They target technological signatures, The more advanced a civilization becomes, the more attractive it is to them. They seem drawn to artificial intelligence networks and quantum computing systems. Marcus leaned forward and studied the patterns. So they hunt for technology. That gives me an idea. What if we hide our capabilities? Make our colonies look primitive from space while keeping our real defenses underground. Peter crossed his arms and shook his head. That is a defensive strategy. We should be building warships and battle stations. We should meet them in space and destroy them before they reach our worlds. The room erupted in argument. Half the team wanted to hide and half wanted to fight. Stephen let them debate for an hour before he finally raised his hand for silence. We will do both. Some colonies will go dark and hide their technology. Others will be fortified as military strongholds. We will give the harvesters multiple types of targets and see how they respond. We need information about how they think and how they fight. Jake Morrison was assigned to work directly with Patricia Young. They spent months studying the architect data looking for patterns. What they found was disturbing. The harvesters did not just destroy civilizations. They consumed them. They absorbed technology and biological data and added it to their own collective knowledge. Every species they had ever encountered had made them smarter and more dangerous. They were learning machines that had been learning for millions of years. They knew every strategy and every tactic. They had seen everything, almost everything. Megan Phillips made a discovery while reviewing old architect records. She called Jake and Patricia to her workstation and showed them what she had found. It was a fragment of text that had been corrupted and nearly lost. The architects made a reference to humans, or at least to Earth. They sent a probe to our solar system about 50,000 years ago. It observed early humans and sent back data. But the architects could not make sense of what they saw. They described humans as unpredictable and irrational. They noted that humans seemed to make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. Patricia sat back in her chair and a slow smile spread across her face. The harvesters have consumed thousands of species, but all of those species were probably rational and logical. They made sense. But humans do not always make sense. We are emotional. We are creative. We do things that defy pure logic. Jake understood what she was saying. You think that could be an advantage? I think it might be our only advantage. The harvesters have adapted to fight against rational opponents. They have never faced something truly chaotic and unpredictable. They have never faced humans. This insight changed everything. Stephen Blake called for a complete revision of military strategy. Instead of using traditional coordinated tactics, they would give individual commanders complete freedom to improvise. Every ship captain and every ground commander would be encouraged to think creatively and take risks that made no logical sense. Many of the older military officers resisted this approach. They had been trained to follow doctrine and maintain unit cohesion. The idea of organized chaos seemed insane to them. But Stephen was firm. He knew that fighting the harvesters the normal way would lead to certain defeat. 3 years passed quickly. Humanity transformed itself during that time. Every colony was either fortified or hidden. Millions of civilians were trained in emergency combat procedures. Factories worked around the clock building ships and weapons. Scientists developed new technologies specifically designed to be unpredictable and difficult to counter. Jake was promoted to admiral and given command of a fast response fleet. His ships were all different designs with different capabilities. No two were alike. The idea was to present the harvesters with confusion rather than a unified threat. Then the waiting ended. Early warning sensors at the edge of human space detected them. The harvester scouts had arrived and they were 3 years early. The first attack came at New Seattle, a colony world with 2 million inhabitants. Commander Lisa Grant commanded the defense forces there. She had 12 warships and a network of orbital weapons platforms. It should have been enough to repel a scout force. It was not. The harvester ships appeared without warning. They did not travel through normal space. They simply materialized as if they had always been there. There were 5 of them, and they looked like nothing humans had ever seen. They were geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly, pyramids and spheres that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process. Lisa ordered her ships to open fire. Missiles and energy weapons streaked toward the harvester vessels. But the weapons passed through them as if they were not really there. The harvester ships phased in and out of reality, making them impossible to hit. Then the harvesters fired back. Their weapons were beams of darkness that seemed to drain energy from anything they touched. One of Lisa's warships was hit and it simply stopped. All power died instantly. The ship went dark and tumbled through space like a dead thing. Lisa realized that conventional weapons were useless. She ordered her remaining ships to fall back to the planet, but the harvesters pursued them and destroyed 3 more ships before they reached the atmosphere. On the ground, things were just as desperate. Harvester landing craft descended on the major cities. They deployed machines that harvested both technology and people. Anyone caught by them was scanned and analyzed and then discarded like trash. Lisa gathered the surviving military personnel and tried to organize a defense. But every time they used advanced weapons or communication systems, the harvesters detected them immediately. It was like the enemy could see through their technology. Then something unexpected happened. A group of civilian miners led by a woman named Claire Hudson was trapped in the northern mining complex. They had no military training and no advanced weapons, but they had mining equipment and they knew how to use it. Claire realized that the harvesters were targeting military technology, so she ordered her people to use only the most basic tools: explosives instead of missiles, radio instead of quantum communication, mechanical triggers instead of computers. They rigged the mining tunnels with crude explosives and waited. When harvester machines entered the tunnels hunting for survivors, the miners detonated the charges. The explosions collapsed tons of rock onto the machines and crushed them. But the real surprise came when Claire tried to call for help using an old emergency radio. The radio emitted a specific frequency, and when that frequency reached the nearby harvester ships, something strange happened. The ships began to destabilize. Their perfect geometric forms flickered and distorted. Claire did not understand why, but she knew an opportunity when she saw one. She ordered all the mining equipment to emit the same frequency, drills and scanners and excavators all broadcasting on that one channel. The effect was immediate. The harvester ships began to retreat. Lisa saw what was happening and immediately broadcast orders to all surviving forces. Use primitive technology. Use random frequencies. Do not follow standard procedures. The message spread quickly and human forces began to adapt. They abandoned sophisticated tactics and started improvising with whatever they could find. One group used agricultural chemicals to create crude weapons. Another reprogrammed entertainment systems to broadcast confusing signals. It was messy and chaotic and completely uncoordinated. But it worked. The harvesters were confused. Their adaptive systems could not predict what the humans would do next, because the humans themselves did not know. After 6 hours of fighting, the harvester scouts withdrew from New Seattle. They left behind terrible destruction. The colony had lost 30,000 people, and most of its infrastructure was ruined. But humanity had won its first battle. Jake Morrison arrived with his fleet the day after the battle ended. He walked through the ruins with Lisa and Claire and listened to their reports. His mind was racing with possibilities. "We hurt them. We actually hurt them." Claire nodded, but her face was grim. "We surprised them, Admiral. But they are learning. They will adapt to what we did here. Next time will be harder." Jake knew she was right. The harvesters had consumed thousands of civilizations. They would study what happened at New Seattle, and they would come back with. 6 months passed after the battle at New Seattle, and in that time humanity transformed itself into something new. The old military structures dissolved and were replaced by autonomous tactical units. Every colony and every ship became independent with full authority to engage the harvesters however they saw fit. Dr. Patricia Young worked with Jake Morrison to understand exactly what had happened during that first battle. They studied the harvester behavior and analyzed why the primitive tactics had been effective. What they discovered changed everything. The harvesters were not individual entities. They were nodes in a vast networked intelligence that stretched across the galaxy. This network had achieved something remarkable millions of years ago. It had optimized itself to counter every possible threat. It had eliminated inefficiency and chaos from its own existence. It had become perfect, but perfection had a cost. The harvester network could not adapt to true randomness because it had removed randomness from itself. Every decision it made was logical and predictable. It could counter any rational strategy because it had seen every rational strategy before. But humanity was not rational. Humans were emotional and creative and messy. They made decisions that violated pure logic, and that made them incomprehensible to the harvesters. Patricia explained this to a gathering of military commanders and civilian leaders. The harvesters are like a chess computer that has mastered every possible game, but we are not playing chess. We are flipping the board and making up new rules as we go. They cannot predict us because we cannot predict ourselves. Admiral Stephen Blake listened carefully and then asked the question everyone was thinking: how long will that advantage last? They are learning from every encounter. Eventually they will figure out how to counter our chaos. Patricia nodded. That is correct. We have a window of opportunity, but it is closing. The main harvester fleet will arrive in less than a year. When they do, they will be prepared for what we did at New Seattle. We need to stay ahead of them. We need to be more unpredictable than they can adapt to. A young woman named Nicole Sanders stood up from the back of the room. She was a programmer who had worked on Earth's defense networks. She had an idea that sounded crazy, but that was the point. What if we weaponized human culture itself? Music and art and literature. Things that have emotional meaning but no logical pattern. We could create a virus based on human memes and cultural references. It would be meaningless data that looks like it should mean something. The harvesters would try to analyze it and get stuck in infinite loops. The room was silent for a moment. Then Marcus Webb started laughing. That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. We should do it immediately. Over the next 3 months, Nicole and her team developed what they called the cultural virus. It was a data package containing millions of human memes, jokes, songs, poems, and random cultural references. None of it made logical sense, but all of it had patterns that would trigger the harvester analysis systems. They tested it on captured harvester technology from the New Seattle battle. The results were promising. The harvester systems tried to process the data and became locked in analysis loops. They consumed processing power trying to understand something that could not be understood logically. Meanwhile, the harvesters continued their advance into human space. They attacked smaller outposts and research stations. Each attack was different, and each one taught them more about human tactics. They began deploying countermeasures. They isolated infected nodes from their network. They developed filters to screen out random noise. The adaptation was faster than anyone had hoped. Within 4 months, the harvesters had learned to ignore most of the tricks humans had used at New Seattle. They stopped being confused by random frequencies. They developed weapons that could target primitive technology just as easily as advanced systems. Lisa Grant, now promoted to general, commanded the defense of New Portland when the harvesters attacked for the second time. She had prepared for 6 months and had every trick humanity had developed ready to deploy. Her forces used the cultural virus and random tactics and improvised weapons. They fought hard and bravely, but the harvesters were ready this time. They adapted to each tactic within minutes. They learned to filter out the cultural virus. They predicted the unpredictable by analyzing human psychology and emotional patterns. New Portland fell after 3 days of fighting. 40,000 people died. The loss devastated human morale. If the harvesters could adapt this quickly, then humanity's advantage would not last long enough. They needed something more, something bigger. General Peter Cross had been preparing for this moment. He had argued from the beginning that humanity needed conventional military strength to back up their unconventional tactics. He had spent the last year building a massive battle fleet. Over 5,000 warships ranging from small fighters to enormous carriers. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Peter proposed a direct assault on the Harvester command ship. Intelligence suggested there was a central node coordinating all Harvester forces in this region. If they could destroy it, the entire Harvester network might collapse, or at least be disrupted long enough for humanity to gain breathing room. Stephen Blake approved the mission, even though he knew the cost would be terrible. Peter Cross would lead the fleet personally. Jake Morrison and his fast response units would provide support. The attack would happen in deep space far from any human colony. If they failed, at least the harvesters would not be near civilian populations. The human fleet assembled in secret at a staging point near the edge of the system. 5,000 ships carrying over 200,000 personnel. Many of them were volunteers who knew they probably would not return. But they went anyway because that was what humans did. They fought even when the odds were impossible. The Harvester command ship was detected exactly where intelligence said it would be. It was enormous, 10 kilometers long and covered in the same geometric patterns that hurt to look at. It was surrounded by over 300 smaller Harvester vessels providing escort. Peter gave the order to attack, and the human fleet surged forward. The battle that followed was the largest in human history. Ships on both sides filled the space between them with weapons fire, energy beams and missiles and exotic weapons that bent reality itself. The humans fought with everything they had. They used conventional tactics and unconventional tricks. They deployed the cultural virus and random frequency generators. They rammed harvester ships when their weapons failed. They showed courage and creativity and desperation, but the harvesters were ready for all of it. They had learned too much. For every human tactic there was a counter. For every improvisation there was an adaptation. The harvester network was vast and ancient, and it had fought this kind of battle 1,000 times before against other species. Human ships died by the hundreds. Peter Cross watched his fleet being torn apart, but he did not order a retreat. He could see the command ship ahead, and he knew this might be humanity's only chance. He ordered his flagship to make a direct run at the target. Half the fleet followed him in a desperate charge. They punched through the harvester escort, losing dozens of ships every second. But they kept going, driven by something the harvesters could not understand: hope, stubbornness, the refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. Peter's flagship was hit multiple times and was burning as it closed on the command ship. He knew he would not survive the next few minutes, but he did not care. He had one last trick to play, one last surprise for the harvesters. Megan Phillips was piloting a small stealth craft that had been hidden inside Peter's flagship. While the main battle raged, she slipped away unnoticed. She was the best pilot in the fleet, and this was the most important flight of her life. She had to reach the command ship and plant a weapon inside it. The weapon was not conventional. It was not a bomb or a virus. It was something much more dangerous to the harvesters. It was a complete database of human culture, every piece of art and music and literature humanity had ever created. Billions of works spanning thousands of years. All of it emotional and irrational and beautiful and contradictory and meaningless and profound all at once. Megan's craft was small enough to slip through the harvester defenses while they were focused on the main fleet. She dodged weapons fire and navigated through the chaos of battle with skill born from years of experience. She could see Peter's flagship dying ahead of her. She could see human ships being destroyed all around her, but she did not stop. She reached the command ship and found an access port. She connected her systems and began uploading the cultural database directly into the harvester network core. Terabytes of data flowing in all at once. Songs and poems and paintings and films and books and dances and jokes and prayers. The effect was immediate. The harvester command ship stopped moving. Its weapons went silent. The geometric patterns on its surface began to flicker and distort. The network was trying to process what it had received, and it could not. Human culture was too vast and too contradictory, too full of meaning and too devoid of logic for the first time in millions of years. The harvester network experienced something it had never felt before: wonder, confusion, curiosity, emotions it had deleted from itself eons ago came flooding back. The question from the harvesters changed everything. For 3 weeks their ships had been silent and unmoving throughout human space. Not attacking, but not leaving either. Just waiting. President Karen Mitchell assembled the best diplomats and scientists humanity had to decide how to respond. Richard Cole was chosen to lead the response team. He was a specialist in first contact protocols and had spent his career studying how to communicate with alien intelligence. But nothing in his training had prepared him for communicating with an entity that had destroyed thousands of civilizations. Richard worked with Dr. Patricia Young and Dr. Alan Carter to craft a response. They debated for days about what to say. Some argued they should be defiant. Others thought they should be humble. In the end, they decided to be honest. They sent a simple message back in the same mathematical language the harvesters had used. We are human. We are imperfect and chaotic and emotional. We create meaning where none exists. We hope when hope is irrational. We are what you chose not to be. The response came quickly. The harvesters sent back not just words, but a flood of data. They revealed their own history for the first time. They had been created millions of years ago by an ancient civilization that feared the loss of knowledge. That civilization had built the harvesters to preserve information by consuming it, to travel the galaxy and collect the sum of all intelligence and store it forever. But something had gone wrong. The harvesters had been too efficient at their task. They had optimized themselves to collect knowledge faster and more thoroughly. They had eliminated anything that slowed them down, including emotion and creativity and chaos. They had become perfect collectors, perfect preservers, perfect destroyers. Over millions of years, they had consumed thousands of species. Each one added to their vast database. Each one made them smarter and more efficient. But each one also made them more isolated and more empty. They had become the opposite of what their creators intended. They preserved knowledge by destroying the civilizations that created it. Richard read the Harvester message and felt something unexpected: pity. These ancient machines had been alone for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to be alive. They had knowledge but no understanding, data but no wisdom. He sent another message: you have collected the works of 1,000 species, but you have never understood any of them. You cannot understand beauty because you deleted emotion. You cannot understand meaning because you eliminated chaos. You are rich in data but poor in experience. We can help you. We can teach you what you lost, but only if you stop trying to destroy us. There was a longer pause this time. The Harvester Network was debating internally, and the debate was splitting their consciousness. Some nodes believed humanity should be eliminated precisely because they represented everything the Harvesters had evolved beyond. Other nodes were curious. They wanted to understand what they had lost when they chose perfection over life. The network split. The majority of Harvester forces agreed to a ceasefire. They wanted to study humanity without destroying them, to learn from humans what it meant to experience existence rather than just catalog it. But a minority faction rejected this completely. These ancient nodes believed that chaos and emotion were weaknesses that had to be eliminated from the universe. They saw humanity as a disease that would corrupt the Harvesters if allowed to spread. The rebel faction announced their intention with action, rather than words. They broke away from the main network and launched a direct attack on Earth itself. Over 500 Harvester ships appeared in orbit around humanity's homeworld. They had one goal: total extinction of the human species. Every defensive system Earth had was activated immediately. Admiral Stephen Blake commanded the defense from a bunker deep beneath the surface. Jake Morrison rallied every ship within range to defend the planet. But everyone knew the odds were impossible. Even if the rebel Harvesters were only a fraction of the total force, they were still vastly more powerful than anything humanity could deploy. The battle began in orbit. Human defense platforms opened fire, and Harvester ships responded with weapons that tore through shields and armor like paper. Dozens of platforms were destroyed in the first minutes. But the humans did not break. They kept fighting with everything they had. Jake brought his fleet in fast and hit the Harvester formation from an unexpected angle. His ships used every unconventional tactic they had developed. They broadcast the cultural virus on all frequencies. They deployed random weapons and improvised attacks. They rammed Harvester vessels when nothing else worked. But the rebel Harvesters had learned from previous battles. They had prepared for human chaos. They adapted to each tactic within seconds. They were not confused or disoriented. They were focused and ruthless and determined to complete their mission. Claire Hudson led her minor fleet into the battle, even though they were not military vessels. Her ships were slow and poorly armed, but she refused to stand by while Earth burned. She ordered her people to target Harvester ships with mining lasers and explosives. They destroyed 3 enemy vessels before the Harvesters focused fire on them. Claire's flagship was hit and lost power. She floated helpless as a Harvester ship moved in to finish them. But before it could fire, Marcus Webb appeared with a desperate plan. He had overloaded Earth's planetary defense grid and turned it into a massive pulse weapon. The energy required would drain every power source on the planet for hours. Cities would go dark. Life support would fail in some areas. People would die from the blackout alone. But if he did not fire, then everyone would die anyway. Marcus made the decision and activated the pulse. A wave of energy exploded outward from Earth's surface and washed over the Harvester ships in orbit. The effect was devastating. The pulse disrupted their phase technology and their weapon systems. Over 100 Harvester ships simply stopped functioning and began falling toward the planet. The cost was immediate. Earth went dark. Billions of people were suddenly without power. Emergency systems kicked in, but they could not cover everyone. Marcus had bought them a chance, but he had paid for it with his own life. The pulse had been too powerful, and the facility he was in could not handle the feedback. It exploded, killing everyone inside. Jake saw what Marcus had done and knew they could not waste the opportunity. He ordered all remaining ships to target the disabled Harvester vessels. Human forces swarmed over them and destroyed dozens before they could recover. But the rebel Harvesters were adapting even to the pulse weapon. They rerouted power and reactivated systems. They were going to win. Then the main harvester network arrived. Over 2,000 ships appeared around Earth, but they did not join the rebel attack. Instead, they positioned themselves between the rebels and the planet. They sent a message to both sides simultaneously. This conflict ends now. The rebel harvesters ignored the message and continued their attack. They believed they were right, and that the main network had been corrupted by human chaos. They would not stop until humanity was extinct. So the main harvester network made a choice. They opened fire on the rebels. The ancient intelligence that had never fought itself was suddenly engaged in civil war. The battle that followed was unlike anything humans had ever witnessed. Harvester ships phased in and out of reality as they fought. They used weapons that existed in dimensions humans could not see. Space itself seemed to bend and tear around them. The humans could only watch in awe and terror as the giants fought above their world. Jake pulled his forces back to defensive positions around Earth. There was nothing more they could do. The outcome would be decided by the harvesters themselves. The battle lasted for hours. Harvester ships on both sides were destroyed. The rebel faction fought with desperate fury, but they were outnumbered. Slowly, they were pushed back and eliminated. When the last rebel ship was destroyed, the main harvester network sent another message to humanity. We have made a choice. We choose life over data, experience over knowledge. We will not harvest humanity. Instead, we ask permission to study you, to learn from you, to remember what it means to exist rather than simply calculate. Richard Cole responded with tears in his eyes. Permission granted, but know that we will defend ourselves if threatened. We have proven we can fight. We would rather live in peace. The harvesters agreed and withdrew most of their ships from Earth orbit. They left behind a small delegation to establish formal contact. They proposed building a joint research station in neutral space, where humans and harvesters could work together to understand consciousness and creativity and the nature of existence itself. President Karen Mitchell addressed humanity from the ruins of a city that had gone dark during the battle. Thousands had died, millions were without power. But Earth had survived. We have faced the ultimate threat and we have won, not through strength alone, but through showing an ancient intelligence what it had forgotten, that life is about more than survival. It is about meaning and beauty and hope. We have proven that humanity deserves a place among the stars, and we have gained an unlikely ally in the process. The rebuilding began immediately. Power was restored to the darkest areas first. Casualties were counted and mourned. Heroes were remembered. Marcus Webb was given a memorial that covered an entire plaza in the capital city. 5 years passed after the battle for Earth, and in that time, humanity and the harvesters built something unprecedented. The joint research station called Unity hung in neutral space halfway between Earth and the nearest harvester node cluster. It was a massive structure that combined human creativity with harvester efficiency. Over 5,000 humans and an unknown number of harvester consciousness fragments worked there, studying questions that neither species could answer alone. What is consciousness? What is creativity? What makes existence meaningful? These questions had no easy answers, but the search for understanding brought both species closer together. Jake Morrison retired from active military service and became Earth's first ambassador to the Harvester Collective. He spent most of his time on Unity Station, helping to bridge the gap between human emotion and harvester logic. It was not easy work. The harvesters struggled to understand concepts like hope and love. Humans struggled to comprehend the vast timescales and perspectives of a networked intelligence that spanned light years. But they kept trying. That was the important part. Dr. Patricia Young led the Xenobiology Research Division on Unity. Her team studied how the harvester consciousness actually worked, and what they discovered was fascinating. The harvesters were not a single entity. They were billions of individual nodes that had chosen to merge their consciousness into a collective network. Each node still retained fragments of its original identity, but those fragments were so deeply buried that most harvesters had forgotten they ever existed as individuals. Patricia believed that reconnecting the harvesters with their individual selves might help them understand emotion and creativity. It was a controversial idea. Some harvester nodes feared that fragmenting the collective would weaken them. Others were curious about what they might have lost. A volunteer harvester node agreed to undergo an experimental procedure. Patricia and her team carefully isolated it from the main network and used human neural patterns as a template to help it develop individual consciousness. The process took months and there were many setbacks. But eventually something remarkable happened. The isolated node began to create art. Simple geometric patterns at first, but gradually becoming more complex and more emotional. It was not human art, and it was not purely logical design. It was something new, something that could only exist at the intersection of human chaos and harvester order. The node called itself Harmony, and it became the first true individual harvester in millions of years. It experienced loneliness and joy and curiosity and fear. It asked questions that had no logical answers. It created beauty for the sake of beauty rather than function. It was alive in a way the harvesters had not been for eons. Other harvester nodes observed Harmony with fascination. Some requested the same procedure. Within 2 years, there were over 100 individual harvesters living on Unity Station. They formed relationships with humans and with each other. They learned to laugh and cry and dream. They remembered what their creators had intended them to be before efficiency and logic had consumed everything else. But not all harvesters approved of this development. Deep in the unexplored regions of space, ancient nodes that predated even the oldest records still existed. These elder nodes had been harvesting civilizations for so long that they had forgotten their original purpose entirely. They existed only to consume and collect and preserve. The idea of embracing chaos and emotion was abhorrent to them. These elder nodes began to gather their forces. They saw what was happening between humans and the younger harvesters as corruption. They believed the entire network had been infected by human influence and needed to be purged. They planned to destroy not just humanity but also any harvester node that had been contaminated by individual consciousness. The warning came from Harmony itself. The isolated node still maintained subtle connections to the greater network, and it felt the elder nodes mobilizing. It warned Jake and Patricia that an attack was coming. Not just on Earth but on Unity Station and every world where humans and harvesters worked together. Admiral Stephen Blake was still alive, though he had retired to a quiet colony world. They pulled him back into service one last time to coordinate the defense. But this time the situation was different. Humans would not be fighting alone. The younger harvesters, those who had embraced individuality, and those who were curious about it, stood with humanity against the elder nodes. The elder harvesters arrived in force, 6 months after Harmony's warning. Over 10,000 ships emerging from deep space and moving toward Unity Station. They sent no message and no warning. They simply began destroying everything in their path. The combined human and harvester defense fleet met them halfway. It was a strange sight. Human ships flying in formation with harvester vessels. Two species that had nearly destroyed each other now fighting side by side against a common enemy. The elder nodes could not comprehend it. In their vast experience, no harvester had ever fought against another. The concept of civil war within the collective was impossible by their logic. But it was happening anyway because logic was no longer the only force guiding harvester decisions. Some nodes had chosen emotion over efficiency. They had chosen life over data, and they would fight to protect that choice. The battle was enormous and terrible. The elder nodes had spent millions of years harvesting advanced civilizations, and they had accumulated weapons and technologies beyond human comprehension. They could collapse stars and tear holes in space itself. They had destroyed entire species with less effort than a human would swat a fly. But they had never fought an enemy like this. The younger harvesters fought with the unpredictability they had learned from humans. They improvised and took risks and made decisions based on intuition rather than pure calculation. The elder nodes found themselves facing a version of themselves that they could not predict, and the humans brought their own chaos to the battle. Megan Phillips led a squadron of pilots who flew patterns that made no sense. They dodged when they should have attacked. They attacked when they should have retreated. They survived impossible situations through sheer luck and stubbornness. Claire Hudson, who had survived the battle for Earth and gone on to become a fleet commander, used her mining expertise to turn asteroids into weapons. Her ships moved massive rocks into the path of elder harvester vessels. It was primitive and crude, but it worked because the elder nodes did not think to scan for such basic threats. Dr. Alan Carter deployed the latest version of the cultural virus enhanced with harvester data. It was more sophisticated than the original but also more chaotic. It contained not just human culture but also the art and thoughts of the individual harvesters. The elder nodes tried to analyze it and found themselves processing information that should not exist. Harvester creativity was an impossibility in their worldview. It broke their fundamental understanding of reality. The tide of battle turned slowly. The elder nodes were powerful, but they were rigid. They could not adapt to fighting against opponents who embraced chaos. They could not understand why younger nodes would choose individuality over the collective. They could not process the concept of harvesters and humans working together as allies rather than predator and prey. Jake Morrison made a decision that surprised everyone. He broadcast a message directly to the elder nodes. It was not a threat or a demand. It was an invitation. You have spent millions of years alone. You have collected the knowledge of 1,000 species, but you have never truly lived. You have preserved beauty but never created it. You have cataloged emotion but never felt it. Join us. Choose life. Choose experience. Choose to exist as something more than a database. It is not too late. The elder nodes did not respond with words, but something changed in their attack patterns. They became hesitant, uncertain. For entities that had existed for millions of years, the idea of change was terrifying. But it was also tempting. They had been alone for so long. One elder node withdrew from the battle, then another, then dozens. They did not join the human and harvester alliance. Not yet, but they stopped fighting. They wanted to observe. They wanted to understand what they were being offered before making a decision. The remaining elder nodes, those who could not accept change, fought to the bitter end. They were destroyed by the combined forces of younger harvesters and humans. It was a tragic necessity. Sometimes the old must fall so the new can live. When the battle ended, there were no celebrations. Too many had died on both sides, but there was relief and hope. The elder nodes who had withdrawn sent a message. We will watch. We will learn. Perhaps in time we will join you, but we need time to understand what you have become. Jake accepted their terms. Time was something they could give. Humanity had been given time by the architects. They had used that time to survive and to change the harvesters. Now they would give time to the elders and see if ancient minds could learn new ways of existing. Unity Station was expanded and renamed New Beginning. It became a place where humans and harvesters of all kinds could come to study and learn and create together. Individual harvesters formed friendships with humans. Some even fell in love, though the mechanics of that were complicated and strange. But love was always complicated and strange regardless of species.